Good morning. I certainly appreciate very much being invited to speak to you today. First, a few thanks, obviously to the Ordnance Survey, but also the British Cartographic Society. As Richard mentioned, I do spend a lot of time in the United States. I have a business there with my husband, Blue Water Books and Charts, that primarily sells nautical charts, but also some land-based maps. But my business, Stanfords, has been in my family, as he mentioned, since 1919. And it's only recently that I've returned to the UK to oversee the move from the building we were in, and I'll touch on that again in a moment. And really back to my love of maps and geography. And my brother is the IT director. I'm the chairman and CEO. It's very much a family business. And I'm very privileged to come from a family of geographers. My grandfather, my father, my mother all studied geography at Oxford University, and I was very fortunate to follow in their footsteps. So what is my role today? How do I see the reason for being here as a keynote speaker? I'm really sort of the cheerleader in chief. I would like to leave you at the end of my 25 minutes with a real sense that you should be going out as foot soldiers to convince anyone who crosses your path of the importance of maps, and very specifically paper maps. And I have nothing whatsoever against digital mapping. Both of my two companies sell a lot of digital mapping, particularly in the marine industry. If anything, we're now selling more digital products than we are paper products. But the paper products remain very important. The same is true here in the UK. My Stanfords for Business division in Manchester sells vast quantities of digital data, but also paper mapping products. But my talk today is really going to focus on the consumer demand for paper mapping products, and again, why you should be cheerleaders along with me, telling consumers why using paper maps is still not just important, but hugely fun. And I know that here at the Ordnance Survey, they are great supporters of encouraging members of the general public to take advantage of the paper maps that exist and indeed improve their map reading skills. So I want to pose a very important question. What is the answer to life, the universe, and everything? Now, those of you who know Douglas Adams and his book will know what the answer is. And if you add up each side of this 3D cube, you will come to the answer, which is 42. Very good. So this is a very important question, to know the answer to life, the universe, and everything. But that's not the question for today. The question for today is, what is the answer to who on earth needs a paper map?
Everyone.
Oh, well done. I'm so excited. Everyone on earth needs a paper map. And again, once again, the purpose of my speech today is to motivate you and also to provide you with some ammunition on how to talk to those who cross your path, to explain to them very clearly why they need a paper map. So Richard mentioned that I started my career with McKinsey & Company, and any of you who have been lucky enough to be sat in front of one of those consulting presentations knows that everything must be done in threes. So my presentation is, of course, divided into three parts. And the first part, I'm going to brag a little bit about the Stanfords business. I can do that easily because it was founded in 1853 by Edward Stanford, who's not a member of my family. So I can say fantastic things about Edward Stanford. He actually joined a stationery business located at number 6 to 7 Charing Cross in 1852. And the gentleman whose business he joined was really all about selling stationery products, ledger books and diaries and that sort of thing. And Edward Stanford joined him as a partner in 1852. And then I'm not exactly sure why, but the gentleman who owned that business decided that he didn't want to continue. And so the following year, Mr. Stanford set up shop, continuing the stationery, but gradually adding maps to his offering. He was a smart fellow because he realized that as the empire continued to grow and as there was a continued interest in the world, the customers in the United Kingdom were ever more interested in looking at maps showing the state of the empire, the state of transportation, that sort of thing. So over the next few years, he expanded his retailing of maps and atlases, but very importantly, he got into the business of cartography himself. He said to himself, I need to be the creator of these maps. I can't just be a retailer. I can't just go and buy the maps that have been produced by other people. And actually, another reason that he got into the business of cartography was that there actually weren't terribly many maps available for him to sell. And so Edward Stanford was really absolutely at the very, very beginning. I mean, obviously there were others that came before him like Imray, Lorry, Norrie and Wilson, who've been around since the 1700s, but broadly they were producing nautical charts. But Stanford was really had the sense that his opportunity was to bring maps to the public. He was very successful over the next few decades, and his business passed into the hands of his son, Edward Stanford, and then on to his grandson, a further Edward Stanford, and so on and so on. And when we moved from Longacre at the beginning of this year to our new premises, we found this wonderful little piece that shows you where Stanford's business moved, from one year to another. So started in 1852 in 6 to 7 Charing Cross. Then they opened another premises in 1873 at 55 to 56. Then they moved to Cockspur Street, and actually the Cockspur Street building is still there, and it has a beautiful pink facade with globes on it. So if you're ever in Trafalgar Square, it's definitely worth seeing. And then not shown on this map, but I will show you another one, is that in 1901, they actually opened a premises on Longacre. And then in 1926, they opened an additional premises also on Charing Cross Road. So this was a business that was booming. I mean, this was absolutely the golden era of creating maps for the general public. As I mentioned, in 1901, Stanford opened a very impressive building at 12 to 14 Longacre. And here's one of the pictures that we have. We actually have a lot in our archives of how the building looked like in the early 1900s when the Stanford's business moved there. The Stanford's archive, out of interest, was given to the Royal Geographical Society to look after. So we still retain a number of images ourselves, but the bulk of them are at the RGS. So from time to time we go over there and we haul things out and sort of try and figure out what to do with it. During the period of the golden era of the Stanford business, in the late sort of the 1880s, 1890s, another business was growing up alongside it. George Philip decided to start a business that focused on creating atlases and globes and textbooks. So unlike Stanford's, that was much more focused upon flat maps and folded maps, individual mapping products, George Philip realized that there was a great demand in schools and colleges and universities. And so his business sprung up in the late 1800s, and he, as I say, focused on atlases and textbooks. You might even remember when you were at school having the Phillips Modern School Atlas. Well, in 1919, my grandfather, straight out of the First World War, Ernest Gordon Godfrey, joined the George Philip Group. And he joined on the editorial side. Even though he had a degree in geography, he wasn't a cartographer. He loved writing. So he joined the group in 1919, and he actually served and then went back and served in the Second World War and then returned to the company. Right after the Second World War in 1946, the third generation members of the Stanford family decided that they really didn't have an interest in running the business, and so they sold to the George Philip Group. Stanford's was a smaller business at that time. The George Philip Group had chosen very correctly, I think, to focus on a path of the textbooks and the atlases and the globes that was a lot more financially rewarding than just the flat maps and the folded maps that Stanford's continued to focus on. My father joined the business in 1949, and in their time, my grandfather and my father were both chairman of the company of Stanford's, which was a division of Philips. There's my grandfather. He's second from the right at we think is an early board meeting of the Stanford's board. And then I mentioned that I would show you another map that we have that shows all 6 locations that Stanford's has been in since it was founded. And I mention this because when we moved from the Longacre premises, where we had been for 118 years, many of our customers were very bent out of shape. They were very upset, and they would come into the shop and grumble, and I would go up to them and I'd say, we are so excited, we're so happy to have moved to our 6th premises because the air conditioning works and there are no vermin, and it's really good to be in a modern, fit for purpose building. And on this, it's a bit hard to see, but there are 6 very small red blobs. This was the very first premises, then the second, then the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth. So we've been lucky enough to stay, very much in the central London area. And creation of maps and retailing and publishing is a very important ecosystem in London. And there is a great demand still for books and for maps. And many of the publishing houses still have their offices in London. So we're delighted that we've been able to stay there. So maps for the masses or not. The reason that I gave you that whole sort of dialogue about Stanford's emerging business was that he really caught the wave of moving away from maps that were produced almost uniquely in the 15th, 16th, 17th century for large landowners. So many of the earliest maps, and I'm just going to show you a few examples from the archive of our new landlord. So the new Stanford's landlord is the Mercer's company, the first of the city livery companies. And the Mercer's company has a large landowning in Covent Garden. And this is just one example produced in 1742 of the Mercer's Longacre estate. And I'm just photographed this corner because that's rather a beautiful sort of a piece of artwork. But you can see that at the corner of the map, St. Martin's Lane. So they own 3 complete blocks that are bounded by Longacre on one side and what is now Shelton Street on the other side. And I have to say I'm absolutely delighted to be their tenant because they are a wonderful landlord, or so far they've been a wonderful landlord, and they are very interested in mapping. So they have this quite extensive archive, of which this is one example. And then this is also of the part of the estate that is bounded by Little St. Martin's Lane, and this was produced in 1766. And again, the point that I'm making here is that long before Stanford started his business, primarily maps were being produced for large landowners, for individuals, and they were being produced to the specifications that were required. So not print on demand, but draw on demand. So we'll come on and talk a moment about print on demand, but these were being drawn to the exact needs of the landowners. Here's another example of a map from the Mercer's archive. This was produced in 1933. And the reason I wanted to show you this one is that our new Stanford's premises are in this first block. So our premises is on Mercer Walk, which is a pedestrian thoroughfare that goes between Mercer Street and Langley Street. And so that's the middle of the city blocks that the Mercer's company own. In addition to producing these maps that showed the entire estate of the Mercer's company, or indeed a map for an estate of any large landowner, maps were produced to be appended to every single lease. And so also in the Mercer's archive are quite a lot of leases. This is an example of the outer cover of a lease. And it's rather fascinating, but most of the maps that go with these leases have hand scratchings on them that show the current rent. And you'll see, and the rent was £14, and then that's scratched out, and now it's gone up to £14 and 3 shillings or whatever. So inflation wasn't very great back then, but they are fascinating. Really, as I say, the point is that before Stanford came along, there were not maps for the masses. The maps were custom produced specifically for mainly landowners. So what's the situation now? Maps abound. Our premises is absolutely filled with paper maps of all varieties covering all parts of the planet. And maps are readily accessible to our customers. Interestingly, there are almost too many to choose from. And one of the largest growth areas of the Stanfords business now is telephone sales orders. Telephone. And until I came back from the States to sort of take control of the move and run the business, we were only manning the telephones Monday to Friday from 9 till 5. And I said, well, why are we doing that? The shop is open Monday to Friday, 9 till 8, and we're open Saturdays and we're open Sundays. We need to have people on the telephones all the time. Why? There are almost too many choices. I mean, just look at that. I mean, just for Chianti alone, there's 15 maps that you can choose from, and some focus on the vineyards in Chianti, and some focus on, is this for cycling or is this for walking or whatever. And so we have a larger than ever team of people who are quite expert answering the telephone and helping people choose between this map of Chianti or that map of Chianti. So again, one of the things I will tell you as the foot soldiers of continuing to maintain demand for maps is that there are experts available to help you. You don't have to rely on clicking on a website. And by all means, of course, we sell things on our website. And by the way, Amazon is a customer of ours, not the other way around. But people like the fact that they can talk to one of our experts to make their selection. So these are the maps for the masses, but interestingly, we now see at Stanfords a return to the maps that are produced on demand for specific individuals. And I just chose these two examples to show you. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the move towards print on demand, site-centered mapping. If you're using vector mapping, then you can choose to maintain certain layers, eliminate certain layers. You can have certain features on your printed map. You can choose the size of the map, the scale, the sort of paper you're going to have it printed on, and so on. And we do a lot of that. And I think that allowing people to use maps to better inform the data that they are trying to examine is exactly why paper maps can be so useful. So these are just a couple of examples. I love this, the great scone or scone map. So towards if you see the scale on the left, so the more blue you are, the more you rhyme with cone, and the more red you are, the more you rhyme with gone. So scone and scone. I just love this. I mean, I'm sure, hands up, who is a scone person? Scone, okay, and who's a scone person? There you go. So you should be able, you might identify, where you're from. So that's a fantastic example of taking data and making it very relatable. And here's another, I love this, the Splinter Map. So on the left, we have the Splinter Map of 1950, and on the right, the Splinter Map of 2016. So in the 1950s, people in different parts of our fine nation, and I have to say this is just for England, this particular one, called that irritating little piece of wood that's stuck in your skin a spool or a sliver or a spiel or a spelk or a spell or a spile. They definitely didn't all call it a splinter. But by 2016, good Lord, what happened? Most people in the United Kingdom are calling that irritating piece of wood a splinter. So again, it's a lovely example of a piece of mapping that brings to life the data. And I think that that's, in many cases what paper mapping is all about. Last but not least in this little segment of my talk, maps for the masses, introduced by Stanford, but now we almost seem to be gravitating back towards much more customized maps that might only be used by a select group of individuals, maps that are of interest just to a particular group of individuals. So I went into the shop and I just picked up, I think, 3 or 4 examples of London maps that are for a very particular audience, very particular group of people who are interested in something. Here is the London music map. Here is the filthy London map. Not quite sure which individuals this appeals to, but, and then here is the Charles Dickens walking along the Thames map, and last but not least, women artists. Sorry that the quality of this slide is not that great. But again, to make the point, we've gone through an evolution. Maps for small number of wealthy landlords and landowners, and then maps for the masses. And now, because of the way we can use mapping data and more print on demand, small print runs, I'm sure Dennis Maps will be telling us about that later, you can produce pretty small print runs of very specialized maps, and you can appeal to very particular groups. And that is a huge, wonderful demand growth opportunity for the mapping industry. So let me finish with my absolute call to arms. Remember, you are the foot soldiers. Why are paper maps still relevant? Well, we all know the answer to this, but let me just kind of hammer it home and also give you a few key words to use when you're talking to the non-believers. So we know this, don't we? You put someone wandering down the street. I mean, I live in London, work in London. It happens all the time. People bumping into you because their face is in their phone, their handheld device. And what are they looking at? They are looking at this thing, which is not a map. This is not a map. This is an aid to navigation. So I think we need to be crystal clear. The things on the digital devices are aids to navigation. A map is something that allows you in a single moment to have a real sense of your spatial context. Human beings do need to understand where they are. And that's why those people that you see walking down the pavement staring at their device, and they look up and they look around, they haven't the faintest clue really where they are. And that's why the paper map, particularly for planning purposes, when you're planning to organize a week's hike, you need to have the spatial context. And that's why a small scale, large coverage map is really important. I just wanted to call out a big hurrah to the Ordnance Survey. They are redoubling their efforts to help people go back to traditional map reading skills. This is an Ordnance Survey publication, and the Ordnance Survey is running, and Stanfords was happy to host 12 of these this year, map reading workshops for adults and children. And that's fantastic. And the OS also produces these wonderful guides that you can get for different walks in different parts of the country. So big shout out to the OS for being at the vanguard of making sure that we're trying to explain to people why using a paper map and having those traditional map reading skills are really important. You know, if you don't have a map of this sort and you're out on your walk and you're looking at your digital device, the paper map allows you to plan your whole route and then decide where you're going to stop for lunch on a rocky outcropping with a lovely view. It's really hard to do that with one of those little digital things. So I'm going to finish up now and just say a few words about our move and what's going on with Stanfords today. So this is what our shop looked like in January of this year. We moved out of the location we'd been in for well over 100 years. We moved out on the 31st of January of this year, and we moved into number 7 Mercer Walk. Brand new, very new building, pedestrian thoroughfare, beautiful. We're very happy to be there. And we're doing everything we can to, you know, inspire people for around their travels. We've got a gorgeous space that allows us to showcase our globes, which, by the way, is a really big part of our business. People love globes. It's another example of why human beings want to have a spatial context. And, you know, that's why kids are always so fascinated, you know, to understand where are they on the globe. And we do have a thriving globe business. I've shown you before, we have lots of maps there. The Stanfords business is really thriving. We have our big London shop. We have a small shop in Bristol. We have a little shop at the Royal Geographical Society. We just opened a new bookshop another 100 metres away called Market Bookshop, which is a joint venture with Seven Dials Market. And it's a bookshop specialising in books on food, drink and London. So we're very excited about that. And later this year, we will be opening our new Manchester shop. So onward and upward, seize your spear and your shield, go out into the vanguard and remind people that thing on their screen is an aid to navigation. It is not a map. They need to relearn the traditional mapping skills. And I'll just end in saying that sales of paper maps are up, sales of paper books are up, and so I think there is a rosy future for all of us who are producing these products. Thank you.
Vivien, thank you as ever for such insight and encouragement. We've probably got time for 2 brief questions now. But otherwise, Vivien will be around at the break if you want to ask something longer and more detailed.
Yes.
Do you think that the outbreak of the Crimean War in 1854, sorry, it's my age, was very, very good timing for Stanfords, the great interest?
Yes, I do actually, and Florence Nightingale was a customer, and we have one of her letters in our archive. I didn't mention, but we're very lucky to have an archive with lots of, you know, the bill to Winston Churchill and the letter from Florence Nightingale and so on and so on. Yes, I do think that the outbreak of that war was very, very fortuitous timing. Yes.
Do Stanfords have any plans to publish maps of their own again?
I don't, not at this time. I think we have to make a choice about whether we're going to focus on being a retailer or a publisher. And we need the support of all of the publishers. And I think it would be a mistake on our part to get into publishing. We want to act, you know, as a place where people can come and get our advice and make their selection. And I think it would impinge on that if we published our own maps.
Thank you. Right. Can we just show our appreciation again? Thank you.